The maintenance corridor on Level 7 of Space Station Orbital 12 was quiet except for Tom's footsteps and the soft hum of life support systems. His toolbox clinked against his leg as he walked, checking the temperature regulators that had been acting up lately. The night shift was always lonely, but Tom preferred it that way. Less paperwork, fewer people asking questions, and more time to think. He paused when he heard an unfamiliar sound echoing through the metal walls. It was different from the usual creaks and groans of the station. This sound was more like shuffling, maybe even whimpering. "Hello," Tom called out, his voice bouncing off the curved walls. "Anyone there?" The shuffling stopped immediately. Tom pulled out his flashlight and pointed it toward the cargo bay entrance. The security lights were dimmed for the night cycle, casting long shadows across the floor. Something didn't feel right. Following his instincts, Tom approached the cargo bay doors. They were slightly ajar. Unusual for this time of night. All cargo operations stopped during night shift, unless specifically scheduled, and he hadn't seen anything on the daily roster. As he squeezed through the gap, his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating towers of sealed containers and supply crates. The sound came again, clearer this time, definitely whimpering, followed by what seemed like whispered words in a language he'd never heard before. "I'm not security," Tom called out softly. "I'm just a maintenance worker. If someone's in trouble, I can help." A crash echoed through the bay as something metallic toppled over. Tom's flashlight darted toward the sound, and what he saw made him freeze in place. Two tall figures huddled together behind a fallen storage bin. Their skin seemed to shimmer like mother of pearl, catching the light and reflecting it in subtle rainbow patterns. Large, almond-shaped eyes blinked at him, their pupils adjusting to the light. They were clearly female, with delicate features that seemed almost human but not quite. One was slightly taller than the other, and both were impossibly thin, their clothes hanging loose on their frames. They were aliens, real, actual aliens, and they looked terrified. Tom had heard rumors about new species being discovered in the outer sectors, but he'd never seen any non-humans in person. These two looked nothing like the grainy photos that occasionally leaked onto the net. The taller one pushed the shorter one behind her, taking a protective stance. Their movements were weak, shaky. Tom noticed how their hands trembled as they gripped each other. "It's okay," he said, slowly lowering his flashlight to seem less threatening. "I won't hurt you." He pointed to himself. "Tom." Then he pointed to them with a questioning look. The aliens exchanged glances. The taller one made a series of musical sounds that must have been their names, but Tom knew he'd never be able to pronounce them. What caught his attention more was the way the shorter one swayed slightly, her knees buckling. The taller one caught her before she could fall. That's when Tom noticed the signs: the sunken cheeks, the trembling limbs, the way they seemed to barely have the strength to stand. He'd seen those same signs in historical videos about refugee camps. These aliens weren't just scared, they were starving. His mind raced through the possibilities. He should report this. There were protocols for unauthorized visitors on the station. But one look at their frightened faces told him that involving station security might not be the best first step. These weren't invaders or threats. They were people who needed help. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out his lunch container. His grandmother's lasagna, still warm in its self-heating package. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he held out the container, the alien's eyes widened. The shorter one made a small, desperate sound, while the taller one held her back, suspicious but clearly struggling with her own hunger. Tom didn't know it yet, but this simple moment, a human maintenance worker offering his lunch to two starving alien sisters in a dark cargo bay, was about to change the course of interstellar relations forever. The aroma of grandmother's lasagna filled the cargo bay as Tom carefully opened the self-heating container. Steam rose in delicate wisps, carrying the rich scent of tomatoes, herbs, and melted cheese. He noticed how the alien's iridescent skin seemed to pulse with a faint glow as they caught the smell. The shorter sister made a soft trilling sound, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Her large eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that made Tom's heart ache. The taller one still maintained her protective stance, but he could see her resolve weakening as the scent reached them. Tom slowly sat down on the floor, cross-legged, placing the container in front of him. He remembered how his mother used to deal with stray cats. No sudden movements. Make yourself smaller. Let them come to you. He hoped the same principle would work here. Like this, he said softly, picking up the fork and taking a small bite. He exaggerated his chewing and smiled, patting his stomach. Good. Safe. He held out the fork, handle first, toward them. The sisters exchanged a series of musical notes that seemed like a heated discussion. The shorter one took a shaky step forward, but her sister caught her arm, making urgent whistling sounds. Tom remained still, keeping his expression gentle and open. Finally, the younger sister broke free from her sister's grasp. She stumbled forward, her movements weak from hunger, and collapsed to her knees in front of the container. The older sister made a distressed sound but followed, hovering protectively over her sibling. With trembling hands, the younger sister took the fork. She studied it for a moment, turning it over in her long fingers, before mimicking how Tom had used it. Her first attempt sent the pasta sliding off the fork, but she persisted, determination overshadowing her fear. When she finally managed to get a small bite into her mouth, her reaction was immediate and stunning. Her skin lit up like a sunrise, patterns of light rippling across her face in waves of gold and pink. Tears welled up in her large eyes. But these weren't ordinary tears. They glowed with a soft blue luminescence, trailing down her cheeks like falling stars. The older sister's protective demeanor cracked at the sight of her sibling's tears. She reached out tentatively, and her sister immediately offered her the fork, making urgent chirping sounds. The moment the older sister tasted the food, her skin also began to glow, creating patterns that seemed to harmonize with her sister's. Tom watched in amazement as they took turns, each bite careful and measured despite their obvious hunger. They weren't just eating, they were sharing the experience, making soft musical sounds to each other between bites. Sometimes they would pause to press their foreheads together, their skin glowing in synchronized patterns. "There's plenty more," Tom said, reaching into his bag and pulling out another container. He always packed extra, a habit his grandmother had instilled in him. "Never know who might need feeding," she used to say. He'd never imagined those words would apply to alien refugees. The sisters watched him open the second container, their eyes growing wider. The younger one made a sound that reminded Tom of a sob, while the older one pressed her hands to her chest in what seemed like a gesture of overwhelming emotion. As they continued to eat, Tom noticed something changing in their body language. The fearful tension began to melt away, replaced by something else: trust. They were no longer pressing against each other in terror, but sitting more comfortably, their movements more relaxed. Tom didn't understand their language, and they didn't understand his, but something profound was happening in that quiet cargo bay. Food, that most basic of human needs, was building a bridge across the stars. With each shared bite, walls of fear and distrust crumbled just a little more. He didn't know it yet, but he was experiencing something unprecedented in human history. The first peaceful meal shared between humans and their interstellar neighbors. The cargo bay had transformed from a place of fear into something different. The soft glow from the sisters' skin created dancing shadows on the metal walls, turning the industrial space into something almost magical. Tom sat quietly, watching as they finished the last few bites of lasagna with the same careful reverence they'd shown from the start. The younger sister set down the fork with delicate precision. Her hands were steadier now, and her skin pulsed with a gentle, steady light that reminded Tom of a heartbeat. She looked at him with those large, luminescent eyes, and then did something unexpected. She smiled. It wasn't quite like a human smile. Her features arranged themselves differently, but the meaning was unmistakable. Joy radiated from her in literal waves of light, patterns rippling across her skin in mesmerizing swirls. The older sister reached out and touched the empty container with long, graceful fingers. She made a series of musical notes that rose and fell like a song. The younger one joined in, their voices weaving together in what could only be their version of a prayer or blessing. Tom watched in fascination as they began a series of graceful hand movements. The older sister would make a gesture, and her skin would flash with light in specific patterns. The younger would respond with her own movements and lights. They seemed to be having an intense discussion. Finally, both sisters turned to face Tom. The older one placed her hand over her heart, then extended it toward him, palm up. A complex pattern of light traveled from her chest, down her arm, and pooled in her palm like liquid starlight. The younger sister mirrored the gesture, adding her own light to her sister's. Tom didn't need a translator to understand the depth of gratitude in that gesture. He placed his own hand over his heart and nodded, smiling warmly at them. The younger sister suddenly stood up, swaying slightly but much steadier than before. She approached Tom slowly, then knelt before him. Before he could react, she reached out and placed her hand gently on his forehead. The touch was cool, like morning dew, and carried a slight electric tingle. Images flooded Tom's mind, not quite pictures, more like impressions. He saw a beautiful world with triple moons, felt the warmth of two suns, experienced the sensation of soaring through crystal spires that reached into purple clouds. Then came darker images: fire, destruction, people fleeing. The sisters huddled in a small ship, drifting, hoping, starving. When she removed her hand, Tom gasped. The older sister had moved closer, her expression concerned. The younger one made soft, apologetic sounds, but Tom shook his head, letting her know it was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. He finally understood. They weren't just refugees, they were survivors. Their world was gone, and they had risked everything on the slim chance of finding sanctuary. The fact that they had ended up here, in his quiet corner of the space station, seemed less like coincidence and more like fate. The sisters began gathering themselves up, their movements more coordinated now that they had food in their systems. Tom knew he couldn't leave them here. The cargo bay would be busy again when day shift started in a few hours. He stood up, brushing off his maintenance uniform, and gestured for them to follow him. He had a small storage room near his workstation that nobody ever checked. It wasn't much, but it would be safer than the cargo bay until he could figure out a better solution. As they walked quietly through the maintenance corridor, Tom realized that his life had changed irrevocably. He was now responsible for these two beings from another world, bound by something stronger than words or laws: the simple, powerful act of sharing food with those in need. The sisters followed him silently, their soft bioluminescence dimmed to nearly invisible levels, but their trust in him shone brighter than any light could. The storage room wasn't much, barely larger than a closet, but it was warm and hidden from regular station traffic. Tom had arranged some spare cushions from the maintenance break room on the floor, creating a makeshift sleeping area for the sisters. They sat close together, their skin now glowing with a soft, steady pulse that made the small space feel strangely peaceful. The younger sister was drawing patterns in the air with her finger, leaving brief trails of light that faded like firework embers. She seemed to be trying to explain something, repeatedly pointing to the empty food containers, then to Tom, then making a circular motion around herself and her sister. The older sister watched her attempts at communication, then reached into a hidden pocket in her clothing. She pulled out what looked like a small crystal, about the size of a coin. It hummed softly when she held it up, projecting a faint holographic display. Tom leaned forward, fascinated, as images began to form in the air between them. He saw what appeared to be their species gathered around tables laden with food. The scenes shifted, showing ceremonies where food was being shared between couples, families, and what looked like important diplomatic meetings. The younger sister pointed eagerly at the images, then at Tom, her skin flashing with excitement. She mimed eating, then pointed to her chest, her sister, and finally to Tom again. She held up 3 fingers and drew them together into a fist over her heart. The older sister added her own gestures, creating a complex dance of light and movement. She showed more images. 2 people sharing food, then those same people getting married, parents feeding children, leaders of different groups eating together before signing what appeared to be peace treaties. Gradually, Tom began to understand. In their culture, sharing food wasn't just about sustenance. It was sacred. The act of giving food to another being was one of the highest forms of trust and connection possible. He had unknowingly performed what must be one of their most meaningful cultural rituals. The younger sister touched the crystal, changing the image to show a family sharing a meal. She pointed to herself and her sister, then to Tom, making that same 3-finger gesture. Her meaning was clear. By sharing his food with them, he had, in their eyes, become family. Tom felt the weight of this revelation settle over him. What he had seen as a simple act of kindness held deep cultural significance for them. No wonder they had been so careful, so reverent with each bite. No wonder their gratitude had been so profound. The older sister stood up, her movements now graceful and sure after having eaten. She performed what appeared to be a formal gesture, her hands weaving patterns of light in the air, while she sang a series of pure, bell-like notes. Her sister joined her, their lights and voices harmonizing in what could only be a ceremony of some kind. At the end of their song, both sisters placed their hands over their hearts, then extended them toward Tom, palms up. The same gesture from before, but now he understood its meaning. An acknowledgement of a sacred bond, a connection that transcended species and worlds. Tom mirrored their gesture, feeling both humbled and awed by the depth of meaning his simple act of sharing food had created. He might not understand their language or know all their customs, but he understood the universal language of kindness and connection. The sisters settled back down, their skin glowing with contentment. The younger one yawned, revealing slightly phosphorescent teeth, and curled up on the cushions. Her sister arranged herself protectively beside her, but her posture was relaxed, trusting. As Tom prepared to leave them to rest, he realized that he hadn't just helped 2 starving refugees. He had inadvertently created a bond that, in their culture, was as sacred as any family tie. He closed the door quietly, wondering how he would explain to station authorities that he was now, by alien custom, the adopted brother of 2 bioluminescent refugees from the stars. Tom returned to the storage room after his shift with more food, sandwiches, fruit, and water packets carefully smuggled from the cafeteria. He found the sisters awake and alert, their skin glowing with subtle patterns that shifted like auroras as he entered. Using their crystal device, the sisters began sharing their story through a series of holographic images. The scenes they showed made Tom's heart heavy with understanding. Their homeworld appeared first, a beautiful planet with crystal cities that caught the light of twin suns, creating rainbow cascades across the landscape. The younger sister pointed to a particular city, her skin dimming with what Tom now recognized as sadness. Their home. The images change, showing massive ships appearing in their skies. Not military vessels, but mining craft. Their world, it seemed, was rich in rare crystals, the same type that powered their holographic device. The mining corporations came first with offers, then with demands, and finally with threats. The older sister's hands trembled as she showed the next images. Their government had refused to give up their world's resources, knowing it would mean the destruction of their sacred crystal forests. The corporations responded by hiring mercenaries. What followed was not an invasion, but a systematic campaign of terror. Tom watched in horror as the images showed the crystal forests being destroyed, cities being accidentally damaged by mining equipment, food supplies mysteriously contaminated. The corporations were trying to starve them out, to make them so desperate they would agree to anything. The younger sister made a soft, keening sound as the next images appeared. Their parents, Tom recognized them by their similar features, had been leaders in the resistance. They had helped many escape on small ships, sending them to seek help from other worlds. The sisters were supposed to have gone with one group, but their ship was damaged during takeoff. The images showed their small vessel drifting through space, systems failing one by one. They had managed to limp to this station using the last of their power, slipping aboard during a busy cargo transfer. They had been hiding in the cargo bay for weeks, surviving on recycled water and growing weaker by the day. The older sister turned off the crystal, leaving the room dimmer. She pointed to Tom, then to her mouth, making the eating gesture. Then she pointed to her heart and made a fist, their gesture for strength or survival. Her meaning was clear. His act of kindness had saved their lives in more ways than one. Tom sat in silence for a moment, processing everything he had learned. These weren't just random refugees. They were witnesses to corporate warfare, survivors of an ongoing atrocity. Their testimony could change everything if they lived to tell it. He pulled out his tablet and brought up the station's newsfeed, showing them the date. Their eyes widened as they realized how long they had been drifting. The younger sister quickly activated their crystal again, calculating something with quick gestures. The images showed a gathering of what appeared to be galactic diplomats. A date flashed, just 2 weeks away. Some kind of conference was being held on the station. The sisters looked at Tom with desperate hope in their large eyes. Tom understood. If they could stay hidden for 2 more weeks, they could bring their story directly to people who could help. Their evidence could expose the corporation's actions and potentially save their world. He reached out and took each of their hands, nodding firmly. He would help them survive until then. The sisters' skin blazed with gratitude and hope, filling the small room with swirling patterns of light. As Tom began planning how to keep them safe and fed for the next 2 weeks, he realized that sharing his lunch hadn't just saved 2 lives. It might help save an entire world. The thought made him smile. His grandmother always said food had a way of changing the world. He just hadn't expected it to be quite so literal. The next week passed in a careful routine. Tom brought food and supplies during his night shifts, while the sisters remained hidden in the storage room. Their strength returned more each day, their skin glowing brighter with renewed health. But on the 8th day, everything changed. Tom was bringing their evening meal when he heard voices in the maintenance corridor. His heart nearly stopped as he recognized the sound of security boots on metal flooring. A routine inspection, at exactly the wrong time. He quickened his pace, hoping to warn the sisters, but he was too late. 2 security officers were already at the storage room door, their scanners having detected unusual energy signatures, the sisters' bioluminescence. Maintenance worker Thomas Reed, the lead officer said, reading from his tablet, "Care to explain why our sensors are picking up non-human life signs in this sector?" Before Tom could answer, the storage room door opened. The sisters stood there, tall and proud, their skin glowing with calm determination. They had known this moment might come. The younger sister held their crystal device, while the older one stepped forward with her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. The security officers reached for their stun batons, but Tom moved between them and the sisters. "Wait," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "They're refugees. They need our help. They have evidence of corporate crimes that needs to be heard." The younger sister activated the crystal, projecting images into the corridor, scenes of their world's destruction, the corporate attacks, the suffering of their people. The security officers lowered their weapons, transfixed by the holographic display. More station personnel arrived, drawn by the commotion. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, watching in stunned silence as the sisters' story unfolded in light and color before them. The images spoke a universal language of injustice and courage that needed no translation. Station Chief Rogers arrived, summoned by reports of the disturbance. She watched the presentation in silence, her expression grave. When the images faded, she turned to the gathered crowd. "Get these beings to medical for evaluation," she ordered, "and someone contact the Galactic Rights Commission. They'll want to hear this testimony before the conference." The next few hours were a whirlwind. The sisters were taken to the medical bay, where doctors marveled at their physiology while treating them for malnutrition. News of their presence spread through the station like wildfire. Other crew members began bringing food and supplies, not just basic necessities, but cultural dishes from their own backgrounds, each wanting to share something of themselves with these brave survivors. Tom watched as the sisters accepted each offering with their customary grace, explaining through gestures and light patterns the sacred significance of food sharing in their culture. Soon, the medical bay became a gathering place, where humans and aliens alike came to share meals and stories. Station Chief Rogers arranged for proper quarters for the sisters and granted Tom special access to serve as their guide and interpreter. Though they still couldn't speak each other's languages, they had developed their own way of communicating through gestures, lights, and the universal language of shared meals. The story spread beyond the station. News services picked up on the tale of the maintenance worker who discovered alien refugees and helped expose corporate exploitation through the simple act of sharing his lunch. Messages of support began pouring in from other stations and colonies. Other aliens living or working on the station began coming forward, sharing similar stories of corporate misconduct in their sectors. The sisters' testimony had broken a dam of silence, and the truth was flowing freely at last. A week before the diplomatic conference, Tom sat with the sisters in their new quarters, sharing a meal that combined human and alien dishes. The younger sister used their crystal to show him images of their home world's healing ceremonies, while the older one practiced human gestures of friendship. They had lost much, but in their darkest moment, they had found something precious. Proof that kindness could bridge the gulf between stars, and that sometimes the simplest acts could spark the greatest changes. 10 years had passed since that fateful night in the cargo bay. Tom stood at the observation deck of the newly constructed Interstellar Cultural Center, watching ships arrive for the annual food-sharing festival. The structure's crystal spires, inspired by the sisters' homeworld architecture, caught the station's lights and scattered them in rainbow patterns across space. The sisters' testimony at the diplomatic conference had changed everything. Their evidence, combined with similar accounts from other affected species, had led to the collapse of several exploitative corporations and the establishment of new laws protecting developing worlds. Their homeworld was recovering, its crystal forests slowly regenerating under careful stewardship. But perhaps the most profound change had come from the simple story of how they were discovered. Through an act of shared food, the tale had spread across the galaxy, becoming a symbol of humanity's capacity for kindness and connection. The younger sister, now a respected cultural ambassador, stood beside Tom. Her skin glowed with the deep, steady patterns of contentment as she watched more ships dock. The older sister had returned to their homeworld, leading efforts to rebuild and preserve their traditions, but she visited often. "Ambassador Tom," a voice called. He turned to see a group of newly arrived alien delegates approaching. Even after a decade of serving as Earth's cultural ambassador, he still found it amusing that a maintenance worker's simple act of sharing his lunch had led to a diplomatic career. The delegates were carrying traditional foods from their worlds, each eager to participate in what had become the galaxy's largest cultural exchange event. The food-sharing festival now drew species from thousands of worlds, all coming together to share their cultures through the universal language of food. The younger sister's skin flickered with joy as she greeted each delegate in their own traditions. She had learned dozens of alien languages over the years, but she still maintained that food was the truest form of communication between species. Tom watched as she led the delegates to the main hall, where thousands of beings from across the galaxy gathered around tables laden with dishes from countless worlds. The scene was everything the sisters had shown him in their holographic images years ago. Food bringing people together, creating bonds, building peace. His grandmother's lasagna recipe had become legendary. It was now served at every major diplomatic function, symbolic of the first meal shared between humans and the sister species. Tom's grandmother, before she passed, had been overjoyed to learn that her cooking had helped spark an interstellar cultural revolution. The older sister appeared on a large screen, broadcasting from their homeworld. The crystal forests behind her sparkled in the light of the twin suns, restored to their former glory. She began the traditional blessing that now opened every food-sharing festival, her skin patterns synchronized with her sister's across the light years between them. Tom joined in the blessing, his hand raised in the three-fingered gesture that had become the universal symbol for unity through sharing. Around him, thousands of beings from across the galaxy mirrored the gesture, their voices joining in a harmony that transcended species and language. As he looked around the hall, Tom saw dozens of maintenance workers from various species sharing meals with diplomats and leaders. The festival had broken down not just interstellar barriers, but social ones as well. Here, everyone was equal in the act of sharing food. The younger sister touched his shoulder, her skin glowing with a pattern that meant family. After all these years, she still considered him her brother, bound by that first shared meal in a dark cargo bay. She pointed to the gathered crowds, then made the gesture for ripples in still water, small actions leading to great changes. Tom smiled, understanding perfectly. His simple decision to share his lunch with two starving refugees had sparked a movement that transformed interstellar relations. It proved that the greatest changes often came not from grand gestures or careful diplomacy, but from simple acts of kindness. As the festival continued around them, Tom realized that this was his grandmother's true legacy, the understanding that sharing food was about more than filling empty stomachs. It was about filling empty spaces between hearts, no matter how many light years apart they might be.